Senate will come to order. Have all senators voted? Any senators wish to change their vote? If not on that question, the ayes are 74 and the nays are 26. The motion to concur in the House amendment to Senate Bill 365 is agreed to. Laid on the table. Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to consider H. Conrad 70. The concurrent resolution be agreed to. The motion to reconsider be laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate. Any statements related to this measure be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if given.
Without objection.
I now ask, Mr. President, we proceed to a period of morning business until 4 p.m. today. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session. They have the approval of both Senator McConnell and me. I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and printed on the record.
Without objection.
Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, the Senate is not in order.
We're in the midst of a quorum call, Senator.
I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended and the Senate is not in order.
Without objection, the Senate will come to order.
President,
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, the Senate Armed Services Committee just met and approved the nominations of Chairman and Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chief of Naval Operations, and the Chief of Staff of the Army and other important nominations. And I congratulate all of these nominees and appreciate their service to the nation. And I know that shortly the Senate will approve their assuming these positions of great responsibility. I just want to take one moment to mention one of the new Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General Ray Odierno, who's one of the finest military officers that I've had the opportunity of knowing, responsible, along with General David Petraeus, for implementing the surge in Iraq. And all of us who have had the opportunity of knowing General Odierno are proud of his new position and know he'll carry out his responsibilities with the same outstanding leadership and efficiency that he has displayed in the past. I congratulate all of the nominees. These are going to be very challenging times. General Dempsey, who will now be Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I believe is highly qualified.
That will be in order.
As is our nominees for Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as the Chief of Naval Operations. I congratulate them all. A special congratulations and word of praise for General Odierno, a great and outstanding leader. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate has passed by a vote of 74 to 26 the debt agreement, the agreement to raise that federal debt ceiling. The bill now goes to President Obama for his signature. The bill not only raises the federal debt ceiling, it cuts nearly $1 trillion over 10 years, requiring a congressional joint committee to recommend another $1.5 trillion in cuts, and the bill requires Congress to vote on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. It passed the House yesterday by a vote of 269 to 161. When the Senate finishes its work today, it will head on its August recess and back in early September. The President is expected shortly to comment on the passage of the debt ceiling bill. You can follow the President's comments when they get underway, and that'll be on C-SPAN. C-SPAN's also covering the White House briefing, which had been scheduled for 1 o'clock Eastern and may be pushed back a little later than that.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I rise.
Senators in quorum.
I would note that we would remove that quorum call if we could by unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise because we have a crisis on our hands with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. And I know exactly why we have this crisis. It's another made-up crisis by the Republicans. This is a Republican shutdown. We just got past the most, well, I feel, made-up crisis we've ever seen. 89 times we've passed the debt limit extension, and it took us weeks and months of wrangling to get it done. Finally got it done. I'm glad we got it done. Unnecessary. I had people in my state panicked that they wouldn't get a Social Security check, small businesses saying they couldn't get a decent loan. All that for nothing. We can do our work. We can take the ideas of, Mr. President, your gang of six, Senator Coburn's. We can have the ideas on the table. We can do this. We did it when Bill Clinton was president. We worked together, and we solved the problem. A deficit and a debt, we balanced the budget, created surpluses. We don't have to have this taking government hostage. So we just get done with holding the full faith and credit of the United States of America hostage, and now we're seeing an extension of the hostage-taking by the Republicans of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. We need to end it. How do you end it? You end it simply by saying, we have our disagreements. On this bill, there are a couple of broad disagreements. They're important disagreements. I honor both sides of the argument. The Republicans want to overturn a ruling by the National Mediation Board. This is what they said. They said rather than count votes by an employee who stays home on a union vote as a no vote, only the votes that are cast shall be counted. Well, I ask rhetorically, doesn't that make sense? If you don't vote in an election, your vote shouldn't count. If the people didn't vote for me and they didn't vote for my opponent, how could anyone ascertain who they would have voted for? Only the people who show up should be counted. That's what the mediation board did. Now, this affects the airlines and the rails. And there is such a desire to stop that and overturn it by my Republican friends, and it's going on all over the country, this hostility to working men and women. And now it's coming here. It's like a contagion. We see what's happening in Wisconsin. There's recall elections, and everything's in turmoil because they want to go after organized working people. It's sad. But guess what? It's a legitimate issue for the conference committee to deal with. It's a legitimate issue for the Senate. By the way, the Senate already had a vote on that, and we said, no, we're not going to overturn the mediation board. The vote was well over 50. 50, I think 6 votes said, no, leave it alone. It's not our business. Let it go. But no, the House wants this. So when we said, when they sent over the original extension, it had that attached, this overturning of the mediation board. And we said, that's not right. We want a clean extension. So they sent it back to us, and they took up another controversial issue, which is to shut down essential air service in some of our rural communities in our country. Shut down essential air service. Now, I could tell you that I know for a fact that there is room for negotiation in this area. We can work together and resolve it, but it doesn't belong in an extension of the FAA bill. This is too important. We have thousands of people who have been furloughed, who are not getting work. I have a situation in my home county, in Riverside, where we have a new tower, airport tower being put up, and unexpectedly there was a rainstorm yesterday and day before yesterday, and because nobody was working there, they couldn't do anything about it to protect the facility, and we have damage. We are losing money because of this terrible shutdown. 4,000 FAA employees have been furloughed without their pay. Hundreds of them happen to live and work in my state. I wonder how these colleagues feel in the House who went home to take their break, how they would feel if they stopped getting their pay. Many of the FAA's engineers, scientists, research analysts, computer specialists, program managers and analysts, environmental protection specialists, community planners are furloughed because of this take government hostage approach by the Republican Party. I've been here a while. I am a person with many opinions, and I have no problem with battling out with my esteemed colleagues who's right, who's wrong, who's hurt, who's not hurt. But I know there is no question that people are getting hurt. Jobs are being lost. $130 million in investments in California airport construction will be delayed. The Associated General Contractors of America, they are already hurting. Businesses hurting. 70,000 construction workers and workers in related fields have already been affected by the shutdown. The FAA has issued stop work orders at 241 airports across the country. I have in Oakland, California, 60 construction workers building an air traffic control tower. They're told to stay home. They won't get paid till an agreement is reached. Well, you know, if you ask most Americans, they really do live pretty much paycheck to paycheck. They have some savings. This is ridiculous. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, the project contractor from Oakland, DevCon Construction, quote, is eating $6,000 a day in operating costs, and, quote, that if this delay stretches much past the summer, we are in trouble because of inclement weather. I'm telling you, this is another man-made, Republican-made crisis. What are we trying to prove? That we're tough guys? Let's get a clean extension of the FAA. Let's take our battles into the conference committee. I want to compliment Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. She is working, and she's on our side on this. She is a Republican senator from Texas who is working with Senator Rockefeller, the chairman of our committee. And we all know the House sent over not a clean extension, but an extension that cuts this essential air service to some of our rural communities. This needs to be worked on, not agreed to in a gotcha kind of a situation. In Sacramento, maintenance at the air traffic control facility has come to a halt. Seismic modernizations at air traffic control towers in Livermore, Palo Alto, Santa Maria have stopped. At LAX, my biggest airport in Los Angeles, and at Carlsbad, power and electrical upgrade projects have stalled. What is going on? Can't we just get over these differences in the proper forum? It's wrong. I'm not going to be personally hurt by this. The senator from Oklahoma is not going to be personally hit by this. The senator from Virginia is not personally hit by this. It's the people we represent, or supposed to represent. It's the American family. It's the construction workers. It's the construction businesses. It's safety. These are safety projects. At the end of the day, are we saving money? We're losing money because we're not collecting the ticket tax that goes to this construction fund. And some of the airlines are pocketing it, and that's outrageous in and of itself, and not reducing the fares. And I want to compliment a couple of the airlines who are, in fact, reducing the fares. Virgin America is one, and I'll put in the record the other one. Good for them. Good for you. So what I'm about to do is to ask for a clean extension of the FAA authorization bill. My anticipation is that the senator from Oklahoma will object, and then he'll offer his idea of an extension. that does in fact make the cuts in the rural communities, and we're back to square one. Why not just clear the decks, extend the FAA? We've never added anything to the extension in all the times we've done it unless there was unanimous consent agreement.
With the gentlelady yield,
I would be happy to.
I want to thank the Senator Boxer for raising this issue. I can tell you how many people I've heard from Maryland, not just the workers at the FAA who have been furloughed, but small business owners who are not getting their contracts, that are going to have to lay off workers that are through no fault of their own. So it would be, I think, absolutely wrong for us to go home on this recess, on this district work period, and not extend the FAA. And for those who think it will save the government on the budget deficit, let me remind you that if we don't extend the FAA authorization, we don't collect the revenues on the passenger tax, which, by the way, is currently being charged by the airlines in extra ticket prices to the passengers, so the passengers aren't even getting the break of the lower revenues. But we're not getting it. It's $30 million a day that we're adding to the deficit problems because we're not collecting the revenue associated with the FAA reauthorization. So for all those reasons, for the sake of those furloughed workers, 4,000, that are really not at fault here, that are currently on furlough, that's hurting our economy, for the sake of the contractors who are depending upon the government funds in order to pay their workers, many of which are small companies, for the sake of the construction work that needs to be done at our airports, including work being done at my own airport at BWI, and for the importance to move forward with modernization of the FAA itself, I would urge us to find a way to extend the FAA authorization until we come back. I would hope that we could get a conference committee to get a reauthorization, but at a minimum, we should extend the current provisions during those negotiations. And Senator Boxer, you're absolutely right, and I strongly urge the Senate to allow a short-term, clean extension of the FAA. That's the best way to proceed, and I hope we can find a way to get this done now so that the damage that's being done no longer will take place. And I thank the gentlelady.
Well,
Senator's time.
I take that as a question, and I will just wrap up with my unanimous consent request, because I agree with everything that was said. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 109, H.R. 2553, that a Rockefeller-Hutchison substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to, that the bill as amended be read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I would make note that there's nothing that we can do now, new, because the House has adjourned. So even if we were to pass this, nothing would happen with it. I've been assured that from the Leader's office and Majority Leader's office. I agree with the Senator from California that probably any action on the mediation board is probably inappropriate for this bill. I wouldn't disagree with that. But my reservation, and I plan on objecting, and I think the good Senator from California knows that, is both in the House and the Senate, by significant votes, we passed limitations on essential air services. And so by majorities that said we could no longer afford to spend thousands of dollars on individual seats, on subsidies for people that live 110 miles from an airport or 140 miles from an airport. But what we could do is make sure, to major airports, that those under 90, those above 90, we could still do that. And so I understand we've placed people in difficult positions, but it's us as a body, not individual senators or parties that have done that, because we failed to do our work. So I would object to this unanimous request, and then I would offer one of my own, noting that if this unanimous consent request is agreed to, it will go directly to the President, not to the House. And so I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 2553, which was received from the House. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table, that any statements relating to the bill appear at this point in the record.
Is there objection?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
There was objection to the original request. Yes, objection was heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from
so
California.
there we are. There we are. There was objection to a clean extension of the FAA. And as a result of Republican objection, people are hurting all over this country. Safety projects are being delayed. And this is just part of what we've seen since the Republicans took over the House. Now, my friend said that everything they've put in this had been voted on by the Senate. It's just not true. It's not true. Not everything in this extension was voted on by the Senate. So let's get our facts straight. My friend also said that the House is gone, too bad, give it up. Not true. I served there for 10 years. If you can hotline it over there and get everyone to agree, they're going to be able to pass it over there. So don't give the American people misinformation on this. It can be done. It just takes a will to be done. House members have taken off, gone home, whatever they're doing, God bless them. But I got to tell you, I hope when they go home, they hear from the people who are hurting in their states because of this. I hope they hear from the construction workers are at the highest unemployment rate we've seen in generations. 15%. And now this is going to make it worse. Construction businesses are crying for a highway bill. And I'm working on that with Senator Inhofe in our committee, and we're almost there. But I want to put this obstructionism, I want to put this hostage-taking into plain view. You just saw everything come to a halt for at least 3-4 weeks because the full faith and credit of America was taken hostage by the Republicans. And they said to the President, it's never happened before, okay? Never. 89 times we have seen an increase in the debt limit. We have never, ever seen this hostage-taking. It wouldn't allow the President to raise the debt ceiling for things they voted to spend money on. When you raise the debt ceiling, you're paying your past bills. They voted for 2 wars on the credit card. They voted for tax breaks to the wealthiest among us, the billionaires, the millionaires. They voted for tax breaks for the biggest multinational corporations, including big oil. Oh, they were happy. They even voted for a prescription drug benefit without paying for it, Mr. President. Then the bill comes due, and they say to President Obama, sorry, Mr. President, we're not going to cooperate with you. They walked out on him at least 3 times. We finally got a deal because some of us, and I say, Harry Reid, strong. Vice President Biden, strong. Mitch McConnell, strong. Nancy Pelosi, strong. The President made sure that at the end of the day we didn't default. But what a spectacle in the world. The world can't even believe this, Mr. President, and I know your hard work to get what we call a big deal, a major deal, a $4 trillion deficit reduction that was fair, that asked the millionaires and the billionaires and the multinational corporations to do something. But no, that wasn't to be. And we wasted time, a lot of time. And what happened? We almost brought the country to its knees, and thank God it didn't happen, is all I can say. And I felt strongly if we hadn't gotten an agreement, the President would have had to invoke the 14th Amendment in order to save our country from this hostage-taking. So that was a made-up crisis, never happened before. Do you know the most times that the debt ceiling was raised was under Ronald Reagan, 18 times. Under George Bush, 9 times. I never heard anything like this before. And I've been around here since the days of Ronald Reagan, dare I say. I was in the House for 10 years. Ronald Reagan said very clearly, he said, don't, and I'm paraphrasing, he was very strong, don't play games with the debt ceiling. It's dangerous. Even he said the thought of it is dangerous. So we just came out of that mess. Now let's look at what else they've done since they took power. How many months ago? 5 months? Is that all it's been? It feels like eternity. Okay. Since they took over the House, they stopped the patent bill, which Senator Leahy says would result in hundreds of thousands of jobs. Stopped it cold. Why? Because the Patent Office doesn't have any money to work on those brilliant ideas that are coming out of our people. They needed more funding. That bill took care of it. The House stopped it cold. Hundreds of thousands of jobs. The Economic Development Administration, I know about that because I brought the bill here. It's a beautiful program. It's been in place for generations. It gives a little seed money in areas that have had high unemployment, and that seed money attracts private sector money, public sector money, nonprofit money, and jobs are created. They build office parks. We have great examples in California of shopping malls. I'm sure my friend has many examples of the EDA at work. They stopped it. They filibustered it. It never got a vote. The Small Business Innovation Bill that my friend Mary Landrieu brought to the floor. The last time we counted, those bills have created 19,000 new businesses. Shut that one down. Then the House passed a budget that cut into the highway fund, and I want to give you specifically, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, what that would mean. If we wind up cutting the transportation program at the level they cut it in the House, a third, and that is exactly what Chairman Mica's bill does, we know because CBO has told us we lose 620,000 jobs, construction jobs. And then they play with the FAA, and they object to a clean reauthorization, and projects are shut down, and workers are furloughed, and small businesses don't know if they can hang on, okay? I thought this election in 2010 was about jobs. I'll tell you, I was up in 2010. I know it was about jobs. And I committed to the people. I'd go back here and fight for jobs, private sector jobs, public sector jobs, jobs, jobs. And everything the House has done since the Republicans took over is to stop our progress. Screeching halt. You can hear the brakes go on to this economy. It isn't just one thing now. It's 5 things I've told you. This isn't rhetoric. They stopped the FAA partial shutdown. They stopped the EDA authorization. They stopped the patent bill. They stopped the small innovation bill. They've cut transportation in their budget there by a third. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what I'm telling you. So I think it is very sad right now that we had a Republican objection to a bipartisan request to allow this FAA to be reauthorized. And it is very sad. And I want to again thank Kay Bailey Hutchison, my friend from Texas, for saying that she stands with Chairman Rockefeller. And she believes we should do a clean reauthorization. And with that, Mr. President, I think I've made my points. But I'm going to make sure I continue to make them throughout this recess. And I would suggest that senators go home and look at the projects in their states that have been stopped due to this Republican hostage-taking. They are against working men and women having decent rights. They're holding this bill hostage. That's what it's really all about. And it's a very, very sad day. And I thank you very much for all this time I've had, and I would note the absence of the quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I ask that the proceedings of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I just want to take a moment and add my voice to the voices of who spoke earlier, the senator from Maryland and the senator from California, about this circumstance with the FAA. I got to imagine if you are a visitor to our nation's capital at this point, trying to see a little Senate debate and see some of the goings-on. It's kind of an interesting day to be here. I guess in a certain sense it was great news that the country avoided a default today. And while an improper or imperfect compromise, I was glad to vote for that. We've obviously got still a long way to go on debt and deficit. But if that has dominated the news, something that has not gotten as much news, but frankly in almost any other time in our history would be front page in every newspaper around the country and every nightly TV news, was the fact that the Federal Aviation Administration, which ensures the safety of our skies, safety of our airplanes, the maintenance of our airports, literally has been in shutdown mode for the last week. We've had close to 4,000 employees of the FAA who've been furloughed. They don't know when they're going to get a paycheck. Not anything they did. Not anybody's complaints about the quality of service or about the safety or anything bad about the FAA, but because of some small program in the FAA that protects rural airports. Now, my understanding is we may get some breakthrough this afternoon. But it's got to be a little weird to think that only in Washington would a dispute over tens of millions of dollars in terms, which is a lot of money, but is about a small service to small rural airports, would in effect have us shut down all the quote-unquote non-essential services of the Federal Aviation Administration. That we would put 4,000 people out of work. Literally tens of thousands of other folks who are depending on the FAA funding to fund needed improvements to airports around the country. I'm sure the senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has got some of those airports that are working. I know we've got a number of airports in Virginia where construction basically stopped because of this political standoff. And similar to the presiding officer, who I know has served his Commonwealth with great distinction, not only as a senator, but in the financial aspects of his state, here's the thing that really has got to make you scratch your head. During this furlough, and with the FAA shut down, the airlines who traditionally charge passengers a small tax to help fund the FAA so you can build the airports, maintain the airports, keep them safe. While the FAA shut down, the airlines aren't required to collect the tax. So during this period, and particularly if we go through this whole month and leave the FAA furloughed, the United States government, in this day when we came close to shutting down and defaulting because of concerns about our debt and deficit, the United States government, because of this political back and forth, would lose $1.2 billion in ticket taxes that nobody's complaining about, or at least no more than usual. $1.2 billion because of a dispute about a program to support rural airports that in total is $14 million. Now, if people scratch their head on that kind of math, they got a right to scratch their head. Because other than kind of back and forth, and this is, as the Senate position here is pretty unanimous, Democrats, Republicans are alike, and overwhelming majorities think we ought to go ahead and we've still got things to dispute. Let's work those out, but not put FAA workers out of work, 1,000 of them here in the greater capital area. Not, as the senator from California said, thousands of construction workers whose projects have come to a halt. And anybody can read a balance sheet, not collect the airport ticket taxes because of a dispute about a program that literally is $14 million in total. Now, only in Washington could that kind of math make any sense. So it's my hope that, once again, that cooler heads will prevail. I want to thank the chairman of the committee, Senator Rockefeller, and the ranking member, Senator Hutchinson, and Democrats and Republicans alike who are working together to say, we got to get this resolved. I know that the American people have looked at Congress, understandably, in the last few weeks and scratched their head and said, what are these guys doing? Why can't they get their act together and, you know, for gosh sake, don't put our country into default? Well, we managed to dodge that bullet. We dodged it in a way that I believe was a fix, not a long-term solution, and we're going to have lots of time to continue that discussion. But as everybody heads back to their home states, dodging this debt and deficit bullet, how are we going to look if we, as we leave town, we leave 4,000 workers furloughed, tens of thousands of construction workers without the ability to continue projects that are needed, and the United States government $1.2 billion deeper in debt, not because of a dispute about how much tax or whether to collect, but simply because we couldn't reach some level of agreement. $1.2 billion deeper in debt, because I hope these workers, and I've co-sponsored legislation, I'm sure the presiding officer supports it as well, to make sure that when these furloughed workers get back, they actually get paid. How can we leave town for a few weeks on end, leaving this issue hanging out? So I hope that those folks in the House and the chair and the ranking member of the committee who are working on this issue will get this done. As the senator from California said, and this is some of the technical process stuff that, again, most people scratch their head about, the House is still in at least pro forma session. There is a path here to resolve this issue. We ought to make sure we do our business, do our job to that public who wants to make sure their airlines stay safe and our airports stay safe. Do that job for those furloughed workers who need to get back to work. Do that job for those airports all over the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who need these airport improvements. And the money's already been appropriated. So it's not like it's new dollars. And do that job for anybody that can read a balance sheet and make sure that these airlines collect that tax that is due, that it's remitted to the government, and that we don't end up blowing $1.2 billion over a dispute that in total is a $14 million program. So I do hope we will get that resolved this afternoon and in a way that can not further make the United States Congress look a little bit less up to the task the way we have, unfortunately, I think, over the last few weeks. Closing comment, and I know the presiding officer has worked very hard on this debt and deficit issue as well. I just want to close with a comment. My hope is that we did take a step today. We took about $1 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years. We need to make sure those cuts don't slow down the economic recovery that our nation is still struggling with. But we've got to recognize that even with this new super committee that's being created, and I think the presiding officer would be a great member of that committee if he chose, but we've got to realize that even if that committee meets its goal of $1.5 trillion in additional cuts, that still doesn't get our country's balance sheet back in order. We didn't create this debt overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. It's not one party's fault or another. Frankly, both parties have got unclean hands on this. Candidly, a lot of our debt and deficit problems are just due to the fact that, thank goodness, medicine has advanced enough that we're all getting older. We're living longer. And that the challenge we've got in front of us and the challenge that we've hopefully got to urge this super committee to look at, something that will get us all out of our comfort zones, is we've got to recognize how do we make sure that our entitlement programs, the promises we made to seniors with Social Security, with Medicare, to the least fortunate in terms of Medicaid, candidly in my state, and I know your state, 2/3 of the folks in nursing homes are on Medicaid. This is not just a program for the poor. How do we make sure those promises are preserved? And candidly, all the entitlement programs are going to need some reform because with an aging population, for example, Social Security, there used to be 17 workers for every one retiree. Now there are 3. It's nobody's fault. It just is the facts. Within the next decade, there will only be 2. How do we make sure that promise still exists? So we are going to need to deal with entitlement reform. We're also going to need to deal with tax reform. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if we're spending 25% of our GDP right now on federal spending, all-time high, that's got to be brought down. But if we're collecting revenues at only 15%, that's a 70-year low, that you're never going to get that 10% differential unless you do some way to generate some more revenues and also cut spending. And the other half of the equation, as I said, along with entitlement reform, which is the fastest growing, entitlement spending, which is the fastest growing part of our budget, we've got to do tax reform in a way that's going to generate more revenue. I think there are ways we can do that actually lower rates and cuts back on some of the tax expenditures. But it's going to take some hard choices. So my hope is that while this step of avoiding the default was important, and it is obviously a good day when the United States of America doesn't default, but we have much more work to do, and I hope that the work of all the previous commissions that have been set up, and they've all kind of come out in basically the same scope of the problem, scoping the problem, and frankly with about the same kind of recommendations. And a lot of that work of the so-called Simpson-Bowles Commission, or the President's Deficit Commission, was what the Gang of Six, or I hope would be the Mob of 60, at some point in the not-too-distant future. That was the framework we worked on, really something that put everything on the table, and I just want to say to my colleague and friend, the presiding officer, and any of the other colleagues who may be still around, I urge them to kind of join this effort. We've got to make sure that this super committee actually takes on the big issues, that we don't default just back to a series of cuts come next year that frankly aren't well thought through or well planned, that are just across the board without regard to effectiveness. And I think the only way we're going to get there is, yes, by additional cutting, but also by entitlement reform and tax reform. And with that, Mr. President, I'll yield the floor, and again, with the hopes that we'll see not only the hard work needed on debt and deficit, but also the resolution of this FAA issue in the coming hours. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.